in that area, if you're familiar with it, kind of right along the riverfront. It appears as though that is where the tornado is. So you see the town of Remy on the east bank. It is just to the south of you there. But as we've seen in many, many instances, the river is not necessarily a barrier. These storms are much, much taller than the river would actually impact the path of a storm. And these things can easily jump the river. So just because you are on the opposite side of the river, it does not mean it can't cross the river. That is, we've seen it a few times already in the past year and a half or so with, for example, the Arabi tornado. But we'll again watch and see what this one does over the course of the next few minutes, as it does look like it's going to be right near the riverfront, maybe right along kind of the river road there in North Vacherie, just south of Lutcher. I'll switch back over to the reflectivity, kind of give you that little hook signature that we're showing. And again, this is one of those where you think you might have some lead time to go out, watch it come your way. This is embedded within some very heavy rainfall. We've already had the gusty winds, the frequent lightning within this particular storm right along the river, moving toward Garyville Reserve. Again, if it were to cross the river there. So this is the path that this possible tornado is taking. And again, we say possible because all we can do with reflectivity and our velocities is show you the signature until we can get kind of ground verification. We don't know if it is indeed a tornado, but everything is pointing to, with that rotation showing up and still showing up on numerous passes of the radar beam, that this is indeed a tornado on the ground. So I'm going to switch back over because it does look like it's almost getting what we call rain wrapped, where you don't really have that hook per se, but you now have kind of heavy rainfall embedded all around it, which does make visibility near impossible. You're not going to actually see this or necessarily hear it coming towards you. A lot of folks think you do, and that is really not the case. Usually not the case with the type of tornadoes that we see here in southeast Louisiana. They usually tend to be kind of embedded within some heavy thunderstorm activity, and you really don't see it. Switching back over the velocities, where you see those two colors showing up close together, what we call a couplet, that is where the rotation is, and it'll be right kind of on the leading edge here that we would have that possible tornado. So Mount Airy on the east bank, again, kind of continuing in that direction, could possibly jump the river toward Garyville and maybe Reserve if it does stay, maybe Hahnville if it stays more on the west bank and continues moving toward almost due east instead of a little bit more of a northerly direction. But either way, all of our communities along the riverfront need to be taking this warning seriously, as this is so far the first of, hopefully not many, but the first of the tornado warnings in our area that we've seen so far today. And I'll tell you what, here is the radar site in Norco, or near Norco, so you're not going to get a better analyzed storm. This is as close to the radar site as you can get to really get a full detail on what the storm is doing, and that rotation that is showing up right around Vacherie at the moment, maybe just to the south of Lutcher. Switch over to the reflectivity, and again, yeah, it's not showing up quite as like that hook, but you do have heavy rain, heavy thunderstorms almost entirely around it, or if nothing else, kind of on the eastern side of where that tornado is passing or is moving toward. So you're not going to get that visual sign that a tornado is necessarily moving in your direction, with it being embedded in very heavy rainfall at the moment. Looking at this again, it does look like that couplet is still showing up, and so far since we've come on at the top of the hour, this is not showing any sign of letting up. So this is not really yet showing a sign of weakening, falling apart, or at least kind of coming to maybe its near end. That does not appear to be the case with this tornado at the moment. So this is still very much an ongoing threat. And I apologize walking off here. I'm going to open up our chat with the National Weather Service office and see if they're providing any more details as they closely analyze this tornado as well. And we will continue to do this until the risk is done. I'm kind of reading to you what they said in an update at 4:06. So this is not quite 10 minutes ago. Tornado, possibly thunderstorm, capable of producing a possible tornado near Chack Bay, or about 10 miles north of Thibodaux, moving east at about 20 miles an hour. It's almost seemed to have had a little bit more of a east-northeast, almost a little bit of a northerly jog to the motion. The radar has indicated the rotation. So far, we've not had any reports of a ground truth, we would call it, of anything there thus far. And hopefully there isn't. Hopefully this ended up not being anything that actually produced any damage, but certainly something that we're hoping that there is no ground truth to as we continue to watch this for at least the next half hour or so. Again, this warning goes until 5. It's very possible that the warning will continue even beyond that after the rotation itself kind of moves out of what we call our polygon and moves more toward Reserve and Laplace. So folks in Reserve and Laplace, just because you are not necessarily in the warned area just yet, really Laplace, because Reserve you are in the warned area, does not necessarily mean that you were in the clear. In fact, as we've been watching this storm almost on the extreme western side of our warned box here, that couplet has continued to show up regularly and very well established throughout the course of the last 15 minutes now. And I would venture to say this will continue beyond the next 15, 20 minutes or so, and that is going to put it right over Reserve and Laplace toward Fournier Landing. And then eventually, kind of following that path, would take it out over the western part of Lake Pontchartrain, maybe kind of clipping around Lake Maurepas, South Lake Maurepas, if it does along that path, but certainly then eventually out over western Lake Pontchartrain. So the areas right along the riverfront in St. James, moving into now St. John Parish, will need to take this seriously. It is very possible, just watching the couplet show up here, it could move in the direction of Mount Airy, which would then put it onto the east bank and then possibly clip Reserve. Again, the farther north and away from the river it gets, then you're no longer in any of those communities. You're more over the Bonnie Carey and the spillway here north of 10, but it's possible that it could continue toward the 10-55 split, just kind of timing it out a little bit farther into the future of where this tornado may continue. As I've said, as we continue to monitor this, the severe risk is actually lower through the next few hours than we will likely see later on this evening. With this active tornado, I'm not going to get into all the detailed models with you just yet. We'll wait until this threat passes, and then we'll kind of detail all of the models as to why it may be a greater severe risk the later on into the evening we go, or I should really say the later into the night we go, because it'll be with that squall line that moves in after about 11 o'clock or so that we may see the greater risk of severe weather. Thankfully, it has been fairly limited severe weather-wise thus far today. This afternoon, this has been the first tornado warning that we've seen. We've had a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings, but this has been so far the first tornado warning that we've seen. And again, with that being said, even though it is the first, it is certainly showing a very well-defined couplet. And as I mentioned, it's not often that you get these little tornadoes or severe thunderstorms that close to the radar. The closer to the radar site you get, the better the detail is, the better the information is coming into our computers. And so this is a very well analyzed, well sampled thunderstorm, and so we kind of have a better confidence in saying that there is indeed a tornado on the ground when you see that couplet showing up so close to the radar site just to the north of Norco. Again, this is the radar for the airport. MSY has their own radar that is in the river parishes, and so we're able to really detail the river parishes metro area with a radar that close. So we don't, as we've been talking about with the Slidell radar going down, we've had to rely on Mobile and Lake Charles. We actually have access to a radar that is much, much closer, and we can get better detail right around the metro area, including the river parishes, and thus we are getting that. Looking at the couplet again, this may be moving right over the river just to the south of Garyville, moving toward Reserve. So Reserve, Garyville, you want to be in that tornado safe space immediately. For Lutcher, Vacherie, you are in the all clear. We can kind of give you the all clear. While you do have some very intense thunderstorms and moderate to heavy rainfall, the tornado risk for Vacherie, Lutcher is over. The tornado risk continues, though, from, say, Garyville, just trying to get some little land markers here. Dutch Bayou, Tigerville on the west bank, and then Reserve on the east bank. This would be moving right in your direction as we continue on through the next, say, 10 minutes or so. Then it looks like if it does kind of continue following along this path, I would say that the tornado is more likely on the east bank, and perhaps say Hahnville. I was mentioning Hahnville earlier. later on, you're probably not going to have the impacts from this. It'll be much farther to your north, possibly and hopefully keeping it even north of Laplace, hopefully keeping it more toward 10 and the open Bonnet-Carré area and moving it out over the western part of Lake Pontchartrain, where there is no longer any of the population being impacted from this tornado. But that couplet continues to show up, looking to see if the tornado warning, if they're giving us any new information here. As of 4:15, the tornado is no longer. It was also affecting parts of northern Lafourche Parish. Lafourche Parish, you are out of the tornado warning right now, but it will continue for St. James, more so St. John now, until 5 o'clock or until the warning is out of that area. We're so far, I'm reading, I apologize if I look like I'm kind of glancing at a different computer here. I'm looking at our chat with the National Weather Service office. We also have a lot of emergency management officials and other law enforcement agencies that are on this chat with us, and they're usually the first ones to give us any kind of eyewitness accounts or anything that they're hearing on into their offices. And thus far, we have not had any reports. Not to say that there won't be later, but thus far we don't have any reports. And this is usually fairly in real time with regards to reports of damage or injuries or anything like that, usually quickly coming into law enforcement. And thus far, I'm not seeing anything that is coming into our chat group just yet. And hopefully there won't be as this storm continues through now St. John Parish, eventually moving what looks to be more toward the reserve areas. So Mount Airy, you're just about in the clear. You certainly have some strong winds there, very intense rainfall, but it is beginning to wind down for you. Reserve toward Laplace, this is still very much in play as the tornado moves toward the east-northeast at about 20 miles an hour. So it is moving at a fairly decent clip. Doesn't look like, based on the path, and we can do is I'll widen out here and we'll go to the last 15 minutes, and you kind of follow that little couplet where you see those reds and yellows to oranges. Actually, it's kind of interesting just to see the motion of this storm. Law enforcement, excuse me, St. John, the Parish Sheriff's Office have just said that they have a tower camera in Mount Airy looking at the river. I was just mentioning Mount Airy kind of in the clear. They're actually looking at that, and they have said nothing is showing up. Strongest wind gusts of 31 miles an hour, I'm assuming, at the Mount Airy station where they have a camera. St. John Parish, the Sheriff's Office also has a camera in Laplace. They are currently monitoring that. It is not yet in Laplace, so it will be Reserve first and then Laplace. But kind of interesting is they've been looking at the Mount Airy camera at the river, and they've not seen anything. That doesn't necessarily mean that something did not pass. Again, as I'd said, this was and still is showing you, switching back over to the reflectivity, kind of embedded within some very intense rainfall, so visibility is dramatically reduced with these possible tornadoes. It's not like you always are going to see these storms, these funnels passing by and you'll be able to have plenty of warning. That is not always the case. With some very intense rainfall moving over the Mount Airy area, it is possible that their visibility is obscured because of the intense rainfall in that area right now. Of course, always, no news is good news, I guess. It's positive that they said they've been watching that camera. Nothing there right now, but they are going to continue to monitor as they have a camera in Laplace. And as St. John Sheriff's Office has been reporting in, I would venture to say that they would likely report if they're getting any damage reports into their office, and thus far they have not reported anything thus far, and hopefully they won't. Switching back over to the velocities to kind of give you that idea of where the little couplet is. It's just about now outside of our warned area. So with that being said, just about to the reserve area, kind of along that line of the warned box here, we will likely see a new warning issued as that couplet continues to show up. Again, kind of south of where we have labeled here Marathon Avenue. That's that's Highway 61. So south of that, this is where the possible tornado is. Thus far, no reports of, and as the storm now pushes out of St. James, the tornado, let's see. Okay, well, good news that the Weather Service is saying, as we've been watching the little couplet, you're not seeing them kind of overlapping any longer. They're saying from the Weather Service the storm that prompted the warning has weakened below severe limits, and thus the warning is canceled. So some good news there. You know, Lafourche and Frenier, you can kind of stand down as the storm, while still intense, does look like at least the rotation is not showing up. As I'd mentioned earlier, and even earlier passes with the reflectivity, we're no longer seeing that hook echo. It looked like maybe that broad circulation, the broad rotation was beginning to wind down. Still kind of scared me, or maybe a little bit nervous with that couplet showing up, but Weather Service is saying this is more or less the kind of the leading edge of these storms rolling in. So while there are still associated with strong winds, and wind, you know, sometimes damage is damage, whether it was from a tornado or the strong straight line winds. This is more or less now the kind of leading edge of these storms pushing into reserve right now. So again, with the warning no longer in effect, reserve, Laplace, you still need to be aware of strong straight line winds moving in. You almost see kind of a little bowing of the winds here in reserve. It does look like the risk of a tornado is gone, but the risk of those strong straight line winds will continue through the course of the next 10 minutes or so as this storm passes through. And we'll kind of widen out as that tornado risk is now gone. We can kind of go back to, I'm going to walk off camera here, walk back to our weather wall, and we can kind of detail where the storms are now, what we've been looking at, what we're going to be looking at for the rest of this evening. Again, this is just kind of the start of what we have been anticipating through the course of this evening. So over the city, thankfully, we have not really seen anything strong or severe. Had some passing downpours, but all below severe limits, even though we've had some rough downpours at times. Nothing that would warrant any kind of warned areas. Now, this had been our tornado warning, or before that been a severe thunderstorm warning. So even with the tornado risk possibly gone now for Laplace, you're getting ready to get into the heavier winds and strong downpours, frequent lightning as that storm continues passing toward maybe western part of Lake Pontchartrain and then eventually parts of the North Shore. Now, the North Shore, kind of a light, steady rain for most, few pockets of some moderate to heavy rainfall passing through, and that will continue over the course of the next few hours or so. Now, our high-resolution models have not done a great job of the individual complexes or clusters of storms. Notice it kind of has just the isolated, or well, I shouldn't say that, but kind of widely scattered downpours all over the place. Doesn't necessarily have that complex of storms over the river parishes. So the high-resolution models are not doing a great job with the individual storms themselves. This will continue to be an issue through 5, 6 o'clock after 7. By 7:30 to 8, most of the storm should be clearing the North Shore into southwestern Mississippi, and we will get a bit of a lull closer to 8 p.m. So there will be time from some of these heavier downpours. If we've had any street flooding or any kind of low-lying area, drainage type flooding, or where the water is still high, we will get a break here to see that recede. But we're going to be watching closely then this squall line starting to set up. The environment ahead of the squall line may be more conducive for severe weather. Now, we'll kind of explain that coming up. After 10, we begin to see that squall line moving into our river parishes and on the North Shore. Toward 11, 12 o'clock, that line continues. Now, this model almost has the line weakening. That would be great, but let's assume that it still has that potency as it moves into the metro area. So the metro area, maybe not until closer to midnight. By 1:30, the bulk of the line is to our east, still moving into southern Mississippi, and it may not be until after 3 o'clock that we are in the clear as far as moving along coastal Mississippi and moving away from the mouth of the river. So this, again, is kind of round 1 of 2. Hopefully the rest of round 1 does not have the potency of the storm that we had in the river parishes, but that'll be something we watch for very closely as we continue through the evening. Something to note, and something I like using to analyze storms, is satellite. You can actually see where those brighter cloud tops are. Notice off in the Gulf waters, we don't really have anything beyond or farther south from where those storms are in the river parishes right now. So as these complexes of storms move north, that should also indicate, and actually per what the models have been saying, that break that we'll get later on this evening. Then we're going to be watching the strengthening of this squall line, which is currently over East Texas. That is going to be moving in our direction later. At the moment, we're still in a fairly stable atmosphere. Something that a lot of folks have pointed out to me. They said, it almost almost feels too cold to get severe weather. And that is, in a sense, true. The colder atmosphere is a more stable atmosphere. We would need to see a warm up. If the warmer air doesn't actually make it to us, then we don't get that more unstable atmosphere where it would be more conducive for severe weather. If the warmer air stays farther south of us, we could be okay. Every model is not saying that that is going to happen, but it certainly hasn't happened yet. Temperatures are still lower 60s. You get down toward the river parishes, you have some upper 60s, but certainly not the types of temperatures that are more on the south end of this front. 71 degrees in Lake Charles. We're now starting to fall into the 60s, but they had been much warmer in Houston. They were in the warmer, more unstable atmosphere. And even with winds out of the south and windy at times, we've still maintained kind of that cooler, more stable atmosphere. Wind or high wind warning will stay in effect through the night and into early tomorrow morning, as those winds still gusting up to times 50, almost 60 miles an hour, and with that onshore wind, coastal flooding. The more immediate concern, obviously, is the risk of tornadoes from a very vigorous upper level system. This system is still well off to our west. We need this to be to our east before we finally see the severe risk come down. What this is also helping to do is send in kind of that surge from the south. That is what is helping to push a warm front northward. Where is that front right now? It is still well down to our south. What I'm going to be watching closely through the night is what do the temperatures out to our southwest do? Does the front actually stay to our south? That is the more unstable atmosphere. This vicinity right here, that is where the more unstable air is. Right along the front, still unstable. You can get severe weather there. More north of this warm front, it's still a more stable atmosphere, and you don't have the higher severe risk. As I've said, it hasn't happened yet, but all of the computer models are indicating that this warm front will move north of us, which will put us into the more unstable atmosphere. And with that happening, as our squall line moves into that more unstable atmosphere, that is where you would get more of the strong and severe storms. And that doesn't move in until well after 10 toward midnight, 1 to 2 a.m. Now, what's interesting is this model as well has a line kind of breaking up. We'll continue to see if that is the case, but certainly something positive as we approach the midnight hour. I'll tell you what, I'm going to be here all night with Alexander Cranford kind of coming in at about 2 a.m. or so, so we're going to stay with this all night long. This would be best case scenario. Hopefully a lot of folks can start going to bed after that, but again, best case scenario is that the line kind of falls apart as it pushes through. We'll assume that it will not, but it's interesting that 2 of our high resolution models are saying that. With that said, though, the severe threat will continue. We're under a level 3 risk of severe storms, which doesn't happen very often, and also what we call a hatched area, meaning there is the possibility of strong, long-lived tornadoes. Something we'll be watching very closely over the course of the rest of this afternoon. Again, we'll get that break after about 7, 8 o'clock, and then continue to monitor this after 10 o'clock toward early tomorrow morning.
This has been a severe weather alert from WWL Weather, sponsored by Egan Insurance Agency.